We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our Sensory Support During the Holidays virtual training series. This is part 1 on sensory support for your child during the holidays. Before I hand this over to our presenters, I want to introduce myself and my co-moderator of the evening and share a little bit about Central Oregon Disability Support Network. My name is Stephanie, and I'm a parent of a neurodivergent kiddo with complex communication needs, and I'm a lead program and volunteer coordinator for CODSN. We also have Yami Gutierrez, a parent and bilingual program coordinator with CODSN, with us here tonight to help answer any questions you may have. So a little bit about CODSN and what we do. CODSN is a nonprofit offering peer-delivered support to families navigating disability in 8 rural counties throughout Oregon. Our mission is to promote a positive understanding of disability and community inclusion, as well as be a source of support, information, and resources for families and professionals. CODSN staff are family members of those who experience disability, and we help you navigate systems and connect you to resources and other families. As parents and family members who have shared lived experience, we're able to provide support and experience from what we've learned along the way. So CODSN is a community parent resource center. We have been awarded a 5-year grant from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs to implement work as a community parent resource center in Central and Eastern Oregon. This includes Crook, Deschutes, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Klamath, Lake, and Wheeler counties. We offer new parent support. We provide cross-disability new parent binders, as well as new parent binders for families who are receiving a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome. We also took part in creating a Central Oregon resource called the Autism Roadmap that helps Central Oregon families navigate resources and information regarding autism. We offer one-on-one support calls, and we help make family-to-family connections. Some of those family-to-family connections include support groups. Right now, we have 2 support groups that meet in Bend, one for female caregivers and one for Spanish-speaking families. We also offer quarterly family fun events as a way for families to connect with other families. We have 3 bilingual staff to help support our Spanish-speaking families. And we offer training and webinars, such as this one, and community education at local organizations and businesses around disability awareness and accessibility. Right now, we're offering an emergency preparedness program where we're helping families in each of our counties prepare for emergencies, and we're helping them get connected with emergency kits. We support families around special education and help equip them to share their voice and advocate for their child. We offer person-centered planning support and tools to help equip families and youth with disabilities to create a life of choices and dignity. And we also offer peer support to grow these skills. We advocate on the federal, state, and community level, representing families on many statewide system meetings, as well as supporting families to engage in sharing their voices with those making decisions in our state and our community. We support families as they learn to navigate the many different systems they encounter on their disability journey. About 60% of what we do is connect families and community partners to resources based on their situation and needs. And we have a beautiful lending library full of resources that families and partners can borrow for free at any time. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please be respectful of who else is in the room, and please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. You're welcome to put questions in the chat box, or if you prefer to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask a question, you're welcome to do that as well. Please be ready to learn and engage. Rachel and Katie may have some questions for us. We would love to see you and hear you chime in, but if you're more comfortable, you can keep your video off. These are our lovely presenters of the evening. We have Rachel Smith, who is an autism specialist, and Katie Diaz, who is an occupational therapist, who both work for the High Desert Education Service District, also known as HDESD, joining us tonight. They will share a bit more about themselves in their presentation, so I'm going to hand this off to them. Let me find my right screen here. And I'll stop sharing my screen so you can take it away, Katie.
Okay. Nice animation there. But that's it. That's the only animation we have. So I'm Rachel Smith, and today we're going to be presenting on sensory support during the holidays. I'm an autism consultant, like Stephanie said, for the ESD. I live in Bend. I'm primarily based out of Bend. I support early childhood and Bend, a handful of elementary schools here. In my role as an autism consultant, a lot of what I do is I try to bring in a lot of neuroaffirming, strengths-based approaches to help school and school environments feel comfortable and successful for the autistic kids I support. And a lot of that is partnering with occupational therapists to consider sensory interests, sensory needs. So I'm very excited to be partnering with Katie on this presentation today. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's my pleasure to work with you as well, Rachel. Hi, everybody. My name's Katie Diaz. I am an occupational therapist for the High Desert ESD. Just a little bit about my background. I've been in the field for a while. 27 years I've worked in mental health, pediatric private practice, and mostly the schools. So that's the bulk of my time in occupational therapy. And I'm in Redmond schools this year. So I'm serving K through 12 and also BRIGHT programs, which stands for Bridges for Resilient Youth in Transition. And I have two children, ages 20 and 23. And one of my children has had her own journey with sensory challenges, and she is actually going to go into the field of occupational therapy. I did not put her up to that. So,
okay. Today we're hoping in this presentation to bring some awareness to not all, but to sort of the high level of sensory input that is present during the holidays. We're going to kind of overview the major upcoming holidays: Halloween, Thanksgiving, and then the holiday season. So including Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, kind of those big family gatherings, lots of decoration heavy holidays in December. And then Katie and I are going to kind of tag team the supports and strategies we recommend around these holidays to cover sensory considerations, and then also thinking about like predictability and routines, which also help increase regulation. And then Katie's going to give a really great kind of overview of our sensory processing system to begin with. So you can be thinking about, maybe you're already aware of what type of sensory needs your child has or you have. Maybe this will be information that helps you think about sort of the compatibility or the ways that there's some friction between different sensory profile needs within your family, whether it's your children, siblings, you and your spouse or partner, or you and your child. All of that becomes really relevant during the holiday seasons when we're all getting together and spending a lot of time together, and doing a lot of sort of non-routine events. And to kind of Stephanie's point, we are hoping, if Katie and I are really casual, so if you guys want to pop any questions in the chat or unmute and ask anything or for clarification, or you really just have like specific questions you're interested in, please feel free to contribute those. We really want to make this as applicable as possible. Anything I missed, Katie?
No, I don't think so. It's a great overview.
Okay, and well, my tech skills aren't great, so we're gonna hopefully this works. So I'm doing an audience poll, but again, there's just a few. So if you guys want to unmute and share, totally cool. If you want to put it in the chat, that's great too. We're interested in the ages of the children that you're here on behalf of, child or multiple, and then a word, or if you want to share like a phrase about how you're feeling about the upcoming holiday season.
You mind if I chime in?
Oh yeah.
My kiddo is 8. His name is Emerson. He is so much fun. He feels really nervous around Halloween. So Halloween is kind of a tricky one for us. And he loves Christmas. However, he also gets really overstimulated during Christmas time. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Stephanie. And I think that that's great to hear too, where there's some holidays that are harder and some, and even that, and Katie, I'm going to touch on that anticipation piece, right? That anticipation can be really dysregulating too, even though the intent is like really excited. So it looks like some other people, 2-year-old, and you're excited about the upcoming season, almost 4, but a little stressed. It's totally relatable. 7, excited and anxious. Yeah, I would say that would probably be where I'm at. Excited, anxious. I think that combo.
Yeah, I would agree. With my 20 and 23-year-old, I'm still excited and anxious about the holidays. All right. Thank you for sharing, everyone.
All right. So Katie, you take it away.
Okay. And there's also someone else who has a child. Yes. Okay. I hear that. Feeling a little indifferent about the holidays and don't care so much. Yep. We have those too in our family, people like that. So I hear you. All right. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with sensory processing. I'm going to give a brief overview and talk about the different profiles. I'm going to try to make this as simple but understandable as I can. So just general definition is that sensory processing refers to how we receive information from our environment and inside our own bodies and using our senses. And then we process that information in our brains to produce a response. So there's kind of this cycle of sensory input, process, response. And some of us may have some challenges with that around how we are receiving that input or how we're processing that input, and responses might be pretty strong or maybe not as strong as what others are experiencing. When on the next slide, when I'm looking as an OT at our senses, we like to talk about 8 different senses. So we've got those basic 5 senses that everyone talks about: smell, taste, vision, hearing, and touch. But then there's also those internal senses of vestibular, proprioception, and interoception. And vestibular sense is our inner ear and how our head is in relation to gravity. So we have these inner ear canals, and there's a fluid that moves in those canals, and they tell us where our head is in relationship to the world. It's kind of our balance system. And then we have the proprioceptive system. That's our system that tells us where our body is in relation to itself. So like my hands over my head right now, it's our muscles, joints, and ligaments that kind of tell us where our body is in relationship to itself. So coordination is a big part of that, just our body awareness. And then interoception, we call the eighth sensory sense, and that is our internal body sensations or signals. So the need to go to the bathroom, hunger, thirst, and then also those senses associated with emotion. So when I feel anxious, my stomach feels jittery, my head feels swirly, my heart beats fast, and it's very personal to every person. So interoception is kind of a newer buzzword, and nothing to be ignored. It is, I could do a whole talk on interoception. It's very, very integral to self-regulation. All right. Hopefully I'm not moving too fast through this, but I wanted to touch on the sensory profiles. And when I talk about these, I want you to think about yourself and then also your child. This is based on Dr. Winnie Dunn's work. She's an occupational therapist, and she has identified 4 different sensory profiles: seeking, avoiding, sensitivity, and low registration. And I'll just kind of show what this little grid means. So on the next slide, there is a vertical axis, and the arrow pointing up means that child might be more high threshold or high tolerance for sensory input, and they might be a little slower to notice sensory stimuli. And then the arrow pointing down is the child may be more hypersensitive or have a low tolerance or threshold, and they might be really quick to notice sensory stimuli. And then when we look at the horizontal axis, to the left, pointing to the left, that means that child's response to that sensory stimuli is more passive. They kind of allow their experiences to happen to themselves. And then the arrow pointing to the right is more active response. So they might really engage in behaviors to control their sensory input. So let's talk a little about each profile. There's the seeker. I'm going to start with the seeker, which is in that upper right-hand quadrant. Those are the kids that they have a high tolerance for sensory input, and they're very actively engaged in it. So a seeker is someone who they might respond less to sensory stimuli, so they're seeking more and they want to get more input. So some examples of a seeker would be maybe a child that has a hard time not touching everything in a store or a museum, or just you take them somewhere and they're like, stop touching, stop touching. Or a child that's just in constant motion, seeking movement input, might be having a hard time staying in their seat at dinner. A child that's always looking around their environment, and maybe they want to interact with the holiday lights and turn them off and on and off and on. Or maybe a child that's constantly putting non-food items in their mouth and chewing on things. It could be their shirt, rubber bands, pencils, just whatever they can get to their mouth. So those are our seekers. And then if you go in the lower right-hand quadrant, that's the avoiders. So it's kind of the opposite of the seekers. Those are the kids who react more than typical. So they have an active regulation to sensory input, and they respond by just avoiding sensory input at all costs. And I want to say at this point that you can be, or your child can be, a seeker with one sense. You could be, say, a seeker of auditory input, and you could be a avoider of tactile input. So we can map ourselves or our children all over this quadrant based on the sensory area you're looking at. So avoiders, some examples of those, they tend to be maybe called hypersensitive. There's a lot of different terms for avoiders. Over responsivity is another word, overstimulated. These kids are often in a state of fight or flight. So they're kind of running on high gear there. So some examples of things avoiders may do are refusing to wear certain fabrics. They might be fearful of playground equipment or amusement park rides. They might be a picky eater and have some oral motor over responsivity. They might refuse to try new foods. Or they might have like a really strong reaction to auditory input, like sirens or crowds or doors slamming or chairs scraping. And they even might try to run away or hide from some of that input. So that is a avoider. Then on the bottom left hand of that quadrant, we have sensitivity. And the sensitive ones are similar to avoiders, but they don't actively try to avoid the sensory input. So they might just they just might display frustration, or they may be easily distracted or irritable or cautious or uncomfortable in loud or bright environments. So some behaviors you may see, or they may cover their ears or cry in noisy environments. They might gag when eating certain foods or textures. They might misinterpret touch, and they might say someone hit them when that child may have just brushed up against them. Or they may be kids that are really sensitive to motion. They might get car sick easily, or sick on rides or whatnot. And then the last profile is the low registration profile. These are kids that seem to miss things in the environment. They react less than typical to sensory stimuli, and they're under responsive. So some examples of that are a child might have a high pain tolerance, and they might not notice when they get injured, or they might have a hard time noticing changes in the environment, like the change of temperature or lights or noise level. They might dress too warm or too cold when trick-or-treating or playing outside this time of year. They may not respond to certain sensory input, like their name being called or a knock at the door or the phone ringing. They kind of look like a kid that has more of a tendency to quote unquote zone out. Not to be confused with just dissociating completely because of being completely overstimulated, but just kind of missing cues and not noticing things. So that's an overview, and I hope I didn't just bombard you all with tons and tons of info, but we're going to come back and we're going to talk about strategies for each of these profiles. So here's a question. How does your child process and respond? So think about that, and think about how you process and respond to sensory stimuli. And you're welcome to share. You can share in the chat. You can unmute if you want to share. Rachel and I can even share a little about our own. I have to say I'm very sensitive to visual input and auditory input. I'm pretty low registration for touch input. So and I don't know if that's because I've been in OT for so many years and kids, slam against me or whatever, but I think I am actually pretty low registration. Sometimes a kid will come and hug me and I'm like, oh, there's a kid there. So those are a few examples of mine. Anybody else? Let's see what we have here. We have someone who says he's a mix of a seeker and low registration. And and that you're low registration. That's that can complement and prove for many opportunities for growth, right? For both seeker and avoidant. Yeah, nobody fits in just one quadrant. It would be, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. I'm sure there are some, but we tend to kind of be in different quadrants when you think about each sensory system, but maybe more one quadrant than others. It's kind of like the personality test of your nervous system is what I like to think of it.
Without all the letters.
Yeah.
And then seeker and avoidant. So thinking about the ways that those can probably feel sometimes a little bit not congruent or incongruent to certain sensory avoid. Yeah. And I think too, Katie, I mean, one thing I was curious about the avoidant type, like sometimes is there a tendency to want to like control, or could responses be kind of loud, or, you know, that might be like wanting to make it stop, like both you said about leaving, but I was kind of curious because, you know, I see students who sometimes get louder when things get loud.
Yeah, that's something definitely to tease out, because sometimes people assume, oh, they just are really seeking that auditory input and that's why they're so loud. But sometimes it's because they want to drown out and control that input. And so it's really a matter of teasing out, like, well, how are they responding to other auditory input in other times and environments? And is it more seeking, or is it more like they're getting overstimulated by it? That's a really good question.
My kiddo, he is avoidant when it comes to auditory input if it involves language, but if it's just like, you know, instrumental music, he's okay. So it's also context dependent as well.
That's a great point. Yeah. And yeah, I think a level of comfortability, if that's a word, and stress level also impact our sensory processing. If a child is in a wholly new environment, you're going to see heightened responses to sensory input. Or if they've gone through some stress, or are in a stressful time, you're going to experience more heightened profiles. Sure. All right. Thank you for sharing, everyone.
So we also, just visually representing too, kind of, and the way Katie also said about the different ways that you can overlap into different profile quadrants. And so finding those spots for you and your child. And then, you know, when you think about more family members, I don't know, Katie, do you want to add anything to kind of this?
Yeah, I was on the fence about this one because I didn't want it to look overwhelming, like, oh, there's all these people with different sensory profiles all coming together during the holidays, and where do we find this sweet spot? But I think the next presentation, not tonight, but coming up, is around caretaker well-being, and really diving into how to take care of yourself during this time of year. And then I hope that some of the strategies we're going to provide will give you some hope around finding that sweet spot with your family.
And Katie and I were planning this and kind of talking about what to include, and she showed this. I was thinking too, like, I'm definitely in the sensitive category for especially large social gatherings, like big family dinners, lots of people. For me personally, it's really hard for me to feel comfortable in those settings. And so to Katie's point, like my sensory system then is activated more. And so I think thinking back when I was a kid at holidays, I was like, oh, just, you know, I thought about it more like personality type maybe, then seeing this, it's like, oh yeah, actually it's just people that were really loud that like to, that didn't feel good to me. And so I think too, I think if you're attending this, you have an interest in understanding that our sensory systems inform our behavior. But I think too, it's helpful just for me too. I have two toddlers. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so sensory systems are really pronounced and especially when they're tired. And I think that this is really helpful for me in my own life as a parent, just like pulling apart the behavior and thinking about it from the sensory lens and thinking about like other people's needs of what feels good to them and what feels good to me. It just maybe makes it feel like I don't know, like maybe I can problem solve it a little bit more. It's less fixed.
Yeah, definitely. So now we just open it up. Are there any questions about that? Any questions about profiles, descriptions, any thoughts too? Any aha, like, oh.
Well, should we go
Maybe it was
into
clear. Awesome. Okay, so we can move on to talking about specific holidays and strategies. I know whenever I attend a training, I'm like, come on, just get to the meat of it. I want some ideas. So we're going to start with Halloween and woo-wee. Look at that picture. Think about what just came to mind when you saw that picture. You can put it in the chat too if you want. If it was like, oh, that's so exciting. I love it. I love all those lights, or holy smokes, I will leave it. Love it or leave it. I think personally, I'm probably going to leave that.
too much going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And there are a lot of other sensory experiences around Halloween. So one we also thought we'd get some input on, because this is definitely one thing people have strong feelings about, are carving pumpkins. It's a very sensory heavy experience. So thinking about maybe for yourself, because you know what it feels like in your body when you carve a pumpkin, but then also maybe what you know from your child and what they've shared or you've observed. Thinking about like cutting open the pumpkin, the feel of the pumpkin, scooping out those pumpkin seeds. Is it something that feels really good to you? And the smell is also a pretty unique smell. Or is it something that you really don't enjoy and maybe are more avoidant of?
And you're welcome to share that as well, because I think some people have some really strong feelings about pumpkin carving.
My kiddo loves cutting it. Like that's totally something he enjoys, but anything that has to do with the inside of it won't go near it. So
He likes like the physical feedback of, because you kind of have to really put your elbow in that.
Yeah, somebody said yucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only part of pumpkin carving that I like is eating the seeds. All the other stuff, I'm happy to leave it.
We use gloves. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if we put that in our suggestions, Rachel, using gloves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To avoid that texture. Yeah.
The gooey inside is cool for 1 minute.
And then it's just like stuck
And
on
then
you.
it sticks. Okay.
So
All
then
right.
other areas.
Yeah, so just thinking about some sensory experiences of Halloween, Rachel and I were doing a little brainstorming around that. And again, feel free to contribute any that you think we've left out. And there's so many sensory experiences around Halloween and the holidays. So some of those are the lighting, of course, the blinking lights, but then also that it's usually dark outside, those strobe lights. You walk up to a house and they'll have those strobe lights going, sounds, the doorbell ringing continuously if you live in a busy neighborhood, decorations that make noise or pop out at you, music playing at houses, kids' voices, dogs barking, often with those ringing doorbells, lots of dogs barking. And then we talked about touch, like the carving the pumpkins, those itchy costumes, or they're extra warm or maybe cold. And then some of those social demands, and how every child has different communication preferences, and saying trick or treat can be really hard. Smells, those costumes. I don't know if anybody's a child of the 70s, 80s like me, but I can look at those masks from that time and I can smell that mask still. I can still remember the smell of the Halloween masks. Pumpkin smells, candles. And then at school, there's often changes in routine and parades and costumes, music, candy, and all the different food changes going on. So we wanted to open it up and ask if there are any other sensory experiences that you have observed during Halloween that has impacted you, that maybe you're thinking, oh, Halloween, we have to deal with this. I'll give you a sec to respond if you think of anything.
One thing that's tricky for our family to navigate is neighbors' decorations, because we live in a townhouse. And last year we had the neighbor behind us who faces our sliding glass door had like this really spooky ghoul that every time someone would walk by, it would do this like high cackle laugh. So we actually had to approach them and just be like, hey, like this is our situation. Is there any way you can move it to like a different area of the house? And they were actually really understanding. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for what you need.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of why people decorate is for the community, right? For the benefit of the neighborhood or for others too. So I think they're wanting to know that that is feeling good to everyone.
For sure.
So then we kind of outlined some general sensory strategies that really are applicable across all the holidays we're going to overview. We're going to put them kind of up front here. So, generally setting yourself, right? And then also your children up for success. So thinking about maintaining, like when possible, like those sleep routines and the food routines, and that they're the foundational sort of pillars of their nervous system are good. And then, other supports, weighted blanket, lap pad for playing, car travel, at the table, opportunities for heavy work before, during, sorry, it's like blocking, and after. Bring a sensory bag of items. So sort of like having an on-the-go bag of items that help that your child's interested in, make them feel calm, comfortable, that can help them maybe, sort of push out some of the other sensory input. Some examples might be fidgets, headphones, gum, chewies, rice flax bag with calming scents, stuffies, iPod with calming music, sunglasses for bright lights, brimmed hat, a mini massager, and Katie's linked there to a resource. And we put at the end of our presentation a link of all the resources we've referenced in our presentation, and this will be shared out so you'll have access to these. But a Christmas calm down kit. Other ideas to consider, thinking about if you're going to someone else's house for an event, asking them ahead of time if there might be a quiet space that your child can go to if needed. And then always give yourself permission to say no. And thinking about that in terms of sort of there's so many opportunities for events during the holidays, and not all will feel like a great fit for your family or for you. And so feeling like there's space to, prioritize what really works and feels good and what traditions work for your family.
Yeah. And then we have some specific Halloween ideas for you all. One thing that we OTs will often say is, when in doubt, do heavy work. Like heavy through your joints, through your muscles work tends to be pretty regulating to, sorry, I see the little cursor going. It's okay. To the nervous system. So, like doing some animal walks, doing some wall push-ups, maybe some jobs around the house that require a little bit of lifting and carrying, just to kind of ground that sensory system, that proprioceptive system, can be really helpful in just setting that nervous system up for success. Build in breaks for those high demand activities like trick-or-treating or handing out candy. Just, take time in between stops. Take some breaths for yourself too during that time. Have those tools on hand. We talked about having a little toolkit, like the sunglasses or headphones or hat. And then, so also alternative activities. And I'm thinking that possibly there might be some alternative activities. Let's see, are we? Oh, I think we need to go back one more slide. There we go. To trick-or-treating. So I think CODSN may have some ideas. I do know there's like a school in Redmond that's going to do a trunk or treat where kids can just go around to cars and get things. So again, giving yourself permission to do something different and still really fun, that's maybe not what other people are doing. Practice wearing the costumes beforehand, and so the child can see how it feels, and also they might be really excited about it and say it feels great, and then you're out and you're like, I hate this, I want this off now, so bring in an alternative, and it could just be their jammies, they're out there, they're having fun, and so bring something else too that they can change into if you need to do that. Bring along a visual so they can check in, because if they're starting to get a little stressed out, their communication may go. And Rachel's going to talk a little bit more of some of those mood meters for check-ins. And then another idea is consider setting up a little table outside and make it all cozy for your kid. So they don't have to manage that anticipation of the doorbell ringing and dogs barking or whatnot, and having to go back and forth, or just make that an alternative. You could start out with answering the door for a little bit, but then settle into your little cozy space too. So those are a few. And then we have scheduled routines. Rachel, is your expertise.
Well, when Katie and I were talking about kind of the sensory support needs, it was really, some of the pieces that add in predictability, and the visual supports go really hand in hand with the sensory strategies because they also help build regulation. Kind of like Stephanie shared about how her son loves Christmas, that anticipation can feel really good at times. And that anticipation sometimes for some children is really hard to manage too in their bodies. And so thinking about, as the caregivers for children who might have a hard time with like non-routine or new types of events or holidays that only come around once a year, some of those visual supports can be really helpful. I'm going to show a couple on the next slide. But similarly to practicing wearing the costume to build comfort, you could practice role-playing trick-or-treating at home with the costume, or maybe with like a preferred costume. And, you know, or go around to families' houses or friends and have them practice trick-or-treating at that door. So because that social, there is a lot of social demand in the act of trick-or-treating. And so however they might be engaging in that, or however you've decided they want to engage in that, having them practice might help build some more success and confidence when they go out on that night, and the sensory stimuli is so much higher. And then thinking too about if there are going to be special activities at school, you know, communicating with your school team about that so you can prepare your child and talk to them about it. If kids are wearing costumes at school, that visually is just going to be really different. And for students who are really visual, take in visual information, it might feel great and exciting. It might also feel really uncomfortable and different because they don't see the faces, they can't recognize their peers. There's less predictability, and that's always just a crazy day at school. So I think any way that you can work with your child to kind of talk about what might be different about that day at school and what might be different about that night at home, build in that predictability, can help you guys also come up with a plan, especially if they're older, and thinking about, and they can engage in that problem solving, like what tools you might bring, letting them know kind of some of the pieces Katie mentioned. We're going to go trick-or-treating, but I'm going to bring this bag with, you know, sunglasses or a hat, or I'm bringing these pajamas if your costume. So they know that there, you know, is a support system in place for them. And, you know, too, sometimes when there's new activities or different activities out of the routine, there can be lots of choices, even, you know, thinking about picking what they might want to carve, or how they might want to paint a pumpkin, or what they might want to be for Halloween. For some children, that's really easy to decide, but for others that can be kind of overwhelming. And so then it might be providing visuals of printing off some pictures of different, you know, ways you could carve the jack-o'-lantern, and providing kind of those controlled choices. Do you want to do this face or this face? You know, do you want to be a Paw Patrol character? Do you want this one or this one? So you're taking in their voice and taking in their sort of agency, but also that like controlled choice can be really helpful when it is a new activity and they're not as familiar with it. And I did link a visual at the end about sort of that controlled choice language of, you know, do you want to do it this way or that way? And I think too, navigating, you know, some of the holidays with siblings where there might be a real desire to participate from one child and less of a desire from another child. You know, controlled choice can be a way to say, like, we're going to do this, but, you know, you can participate this way or this way, you know, and then also saying, oh, and we have these supports when we do it this way. Because it can be hard when we think about all those the sort of back to that visual, the overlapping family sensory systems of trying to make sure that every, you know, we're including the needs of all of like multiple family members sometimes means that there is some problem solving needed. Okay. And then these are just examples, and I linked these to, this is a social story here on the left with the pumpkin. And so a social story is going to outline a little bit in more detail, but again, appropriate to the child's, you know, developmental level. Explain what happens during a certain activity, or sometimes why we do an activity. And it would include visuals. And so this is an example of one about what happens when we carve a pumpkin with pictures. So you could go through it, and then you could explain to the child that they're going to do that, so they have some warning and understanding about what might be happening. And sometimes too, it can be helpful for teaching, you know, for example, like, why do we trick or treat? Why do people come and ring my doorbell? This is weird, you know, it might, for some children, that might be a confusing, like some of the traditions that, you know, other children really attach to feel really confusing to other kids. And so sometimes social stories can be a way to sort of explain where a tradition comes from, why people engage in it. and sort of explain that why piece, because for some kids, the why piece is really important to understand that this is important to other people for this reason, because it might not be important and it might not make a lot of sense to your child. And then sort of like a visual schedule here on the right. And that's a more condensed sort of step-by-step version visual of a social story in a way. So this is an example of a visual schedule for trick-or-treating. And this might be something where, again, you could bring it with you if you wanted to remind your child of the steps, or use it at home to practice in those steps of sort of an activity that has very predictable steps. You could also use it for carving a pumpkin so they know what's coming. Like, this is where we're going to start on this activity. This is where we'll end. This is what's going to happen. You could think about going to, a dinner or another type of party where you could kind of quick draw even for your child if they're a visual learner, like what might happen at the party, when you'll leave the party. And again, the more you can kind of, build the predictability and sort of close that expectation gap where you're understanding too what your child's expectation or showing them what the expectation is, it can help with that regulation piece as well. And then the last one we thought about showing was like a planner. And this is when I like to think about, this is a week planner that you could have up on your wall. And for this one strategy I've heard that I really like is just having a planner for non-routine events. So sometimes you might have a schedule of routine events for your child. We go to school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Maybe there's swim lessons or speech, or other activities your child engages in that you might have a schedule for so they know what's happening. But maybe consider having one, especially during the holidays, for things that are just going to be different. So we're going to go to grandma's and carve pumpkins on this day, or we're going to do trick-or-treating, or school is closed this day, or this day is a crazy hair day at school, whenever some schools do different types of events for Halloween. Or, you can use it on a more ongoing basis to track things like if there's a doctor's appointment, or if they're gonna have a babysitter or a different caregiver, things that you could review at the beginning of the week that'll be non-routine and help build in that understanding that something different is coming. I like this and think about this. We have one of these up in our house because predictability is really important to all of us. And so we just put on it things that are different each week. And that cues me into like, oh yeah, I need to talk to my kids and let them know that's coming, and that's going to be happening, and that's different. And so sometimes it's a good reminder to us as the caregivers to review this with our child, that there's a different event or a change in events. And then if your child's older and can read and track a planner, then they could also access it themselves and review it. And I linked that at the end too. Okay.
All your ideas. I'm just eating them up myself. So it's great.
And
Speaking of eating them up, here's Thanksgiving.
oh, sorry. I keep doing that. I'm like, my chat box disappears. So then I try to get it back. Anyways, Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So here's a picture. And when you see the picture and you think about your Thanksgiving table or where you're going to be and all those sensory experiences, this is kind of kicking off the holidays, right? Think about through those senses, what do you associate with Thanksgiving? The sounds, the smells, the taste, the even touch. Like, what do you associate with Thanksgiving? And if you all would be so willing to drop a word or a few words in the chat about what you associate with Thanksgiving, it'd be great. Oh, Gosh, what a great point. Someone said that very few of those dishes would be on the table because of limited food choices. Yes, that is so common with our kids with sensory processing challenges. And there's also allergies as well. So that can be another hard part too. Oh, and Stephanie had that touch temperature sensation of it's warm in the house because of all the cooking. Yes. Yeah, so yeah, smell of food, warmth due to, sorry, I have to open my chat box, to the oven being on. Yeah, cozy and warm inside, cooler outside, for sure.
I grew up in a big football house, so I always just, when I see Thanksgiving food, I hear, it's like I associate sounds. So the TV being on, football's on, there's like loud comments, like it just feels very loud when I think about Thanksgiving.
I think of loud in a different way, in that I have a large, loud family. And lots of people talking at the same time, sometimes talking over each other. And well, earlier, the kids are all pretty much grown now, but kids running around. All right, so let's talk a little more about some of those sensory experiences during Thanksgiving. Taste, I mean, it's Thanksgiving, so lots of different foods, lots of textures. When I think of texture, I think of stuffing, and I actually think of how the texture of stuffing when I was a kid kind of made me gag a little bit. And you've got those softer other textures like mashed potatoes, but then you have the meat textures, all sorts of textures and tastes. And then, yeah, there's that food selectiveness, that limited choices that kids will have. And then also that compatibility with other family members, and the cooking of others is different. So everybody's bringing in their own dishes sometimes. And it's like, wait, that isn't the way I thought that pumpkin pie was supposed to taste. That's not the way my mom made it. And so, yuck, you know? So that's a big one. Taste is a big one. And I think one that families think about a lot when they're prepping for Thanksgiving and their children for that. And we're going to talk a little bit about a little later about how to communicate to family members when you know your child might be refusing to eat some of the things or participate in some of the activities. The social demands, lots of people, lots of different people in their space, going over to someone's house, lots of questions, like family members asking kids, oh, what's your favorite subject in school? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you know, and being bombarded with questions and how to navigate that. Also, family members, possibly boundaries of touching or hugging when your kid might not want that, and how to communicate that. Noises, I talked a little bit about that earlier, just about having a large family and just people talking all at once. In the football, we talked about that. I remember this one with my daughter, having to sit at the dinner table for extended period, and the social expectations of that and the demands of it, and how my kid simply just could not do it. And that pull between, you know, letting go of other people's opinions and expectations and meeting your child's sensory needs. And then smells, lots and lots and lots of smells, just the different smell of being in people's houses. Everybody's house has a different smell. That's another sensitivity of mine, is smells. So it smells of people. I can, cologne, and that mixing with the food smell. The other night, my husband lit a candle before dinner, and I said, we need to blow that candle out. I can't have that smell mixing with dinner smell. Sorry. So just being aware of all that. There's a lot that they're navigating. But there are things we can do. And some of those are providing predictability and routines, which Rachel's going to talk a little bit about.
Yeah. And, kind of to, Katie's point about like families having different boundaries with physical touch or not respecting boundaries. I think too, in personal experience and the experience I hear too from, friends about their family, there's often a boundary crossing around opinions about how other kids should eat or what they eat or how much they eat. And that's often shared without it being solicited. And so that was a consideration Katie and I talked about when we were putting this together too. Just thinking about if you are going to someone's house, and, to Katie's point too, where food might be prepared differently than how you do it in your house, or you have a child who is very selective and you might be bringing your own food so that they are nourished and can eat, that might be something you'd want to talk about beforehand so that it doesn't become something where it's felt that that person or that host or hostess might take it personally, or they understand for their own predictability too, that they understand you might be bringing your own food for your child. And to that end too, like talking with your child too about if you're going to someone's house, the pumpkin pie might look different and this might look different than how it does at our house, and let them know that either you're bringing food so they can feel assured that they might not be expected to eat that, and let them know too what the plan is that you think will work, or work out a plan with them, and communicating that to everyone. And then, to just like setting them up for success, like who they might be seated next to at dinner, maybe not seating them next to someone who is going to ask a lot of questions. Often I think I hear that students, that they sometimes are more comfortable. If you have a child who's more comfortable with maybe younger children, maybe if there are other children there, seating them next to a younger child, next to the type of just where you think they will be most successful. And just some of these little pieces where if you plan ahead, it can help in the moment bring down those reactive responses. And then if you are hosting and there are lots of kids or other kids coming, there can be issues around, toy sharing, coming up with a plan with your child if you're going to have their room open for others to come into or closed, or what toys they might be willing to share and what toys maybe they need to put away. So again, you're setting them up for those successful experiences, and they understand the expectations. And, if they are going to be expected to sit at a table and that might be hard, letting them know how long, when they'll be done. Really, and if you need visuals for that might be a time to think about whether it's a timer, if they have a watch, maybe they're older, or if you maybe you'll show them or let them know when it's time, but some way that they understand when that sort of daunting task is going to end can help build more success in that activity. Okay. And just, this is sort of a little bit, further of what we've already kind of talked about talking those sort of harder conversations with family members, both about, food selectiveness, but also sitting at a table is really hard for some children. And that might not be an expectation that you have for your child at home. And that might not be something you're working on because there's other areas that you're working on. And that might not be a value, something that is that is important to your family in terms of like, it's not considered a problem, right? For how your family does dinner. But if you're going to someone else's house, they might have a different set of expectations. And so we were kind of talking about, well, what language would be helpful or might, explain your child's needs. And we came up with this, which, sorry, I keep having to move my boxes around. We're working hard on being flexible and they're not there yet. Today's not a day to actively practice these skills, but meet them where they're at. Because as you guys know, when we're in environments that are stressful on our nervous system, it's not a time to actively work on challenging those skills or those nervous systems. It's a time to really work on keeping them regulated. So they can feel like they are an included part and an important part of that family, and that their needs are being cared for and taken care of. And sometimes that is not as obvious to extended family who have just different expectations.
Yeah, I think being clear and yeah, communicating that ahead of time if you're able to, that would be great. So you're going to be in your own state of potential stress as well. So being able to kind of have that out of the way, share that with your kind of key players in the family, and maybe even ask their support with other family members and say, hey, I know you've been supportive in my life and in our kids' life, and this is where we're coming at. Can you also, help us with this as well if people start giving some unsolicited advice? So just kind of pulling that together as well. What I would love to hear if anybody has any language they have used with their own families or how they have communicated their needs and their child's needs to people. If anybody wants to share, again, you can share in the chat or unmute.
I'll go. I really love this quote, and I love what you mentioned, Katie, about talking to family members beforehand. We try really hard not to talk about my kiddo in front of him like he's not there. So we like to have those conversations beforehand. He tends to say yuck when he doesn't want something, even if he likes it. So we had to have this long conversation with our family, like, wait, no, he likes it. He's not saying it's gross. He's just saying he doesn't, that's his way of saying he doesn't want it right now. And he does that at home. It's nothing personal. So yeah, just lots of prep work before those events is really helpful.
Yeah, and one last thing too, I think with communicating too, if you can find a little lightness in yourself too, like a little, because these conversations can be hard, and there might be a little bit of stress building up to having the conversations. So finding that kind of just a little bit of levity and lightness. And so as you're articulating, there's not a lot of strong emotional attachment, which I know is super hard to do. And I am not great at that, but just so it becomes a more neutral conversation as well, if that's possible. Okay.
Yes. Okay, great. So Stephanie is aware of Autism Level Up. Awesome. I agree. Such a great resource. So I linked this. We use these a lot in schools. And so students are really, your child or some children are familiar with sort of visual mood meters, energy meters. And, Katie kind of referenced this earlier. These tools can be helpful when just like a quick check-in where there's not a verbal sort of exchange needed. And if your child is, maybe they are verbal, but when they get more dysregulated, they don't prefer to communicate that way, or maybe they prefer to communicate using visuals that feels more comfortable to them. These are great things you can print and keep in your purse or keep in sort of like that sensory kit you might be bringing with you. The one on the left is from Autism Leveled Up, and they do a great job. They call them like energy meters. So the language isn't emotion based, because emotions can be very abstract and hard for some children to understand and relate to. They just aren't as meaningful, those words, but energy levels are more relatable. And they have lots of different versions that are available on their website for different types of interests, like cars or Disney princesses or Marvel. And then on the right is zones of regulation, which also is a commonly used, but you can see it's more emotion based. So the language like tired, sick, sad, which to some children they can relate to and identify with, and other children they tend to just say they're in the green zone or the red, like the sort of those extremes, because it just isn't there. What Katie talked about at the beginning about that interoception piece of being able to identify where you are and how you're feeling and how your body is. It doesn't really relate to emotions, right? And so the emotion language can be not as relatable. So I'm providing sort of both, and I linked both on the end. But I like those. You could think about too, if you were problem solving with your child, like, having a plan like, hey, if you start to get into amped up, maxed out zone, I want you to know that, grandma said you can go in their bedroom, right? So it's sort of making it a little more concrete too about what the options are. Or, hey, please come find me if you start to get up into these areas, I'll be downstairs. So they can understand too what in a different setting, in a different environment, what supports are available to them if they start to just feel really uncomfortable and dysregulated. Okay. So let's see, just do a time check. How are we doing? All right, we're getting there. Okay. The holiday season. So many amazing, exciting, overwhelming events and sensory components of the holiday season. I think maybe in the interest of time, we're just kind of move on here. So Kate is going to talk a little bit about travel. That's also a really fun part of the holiday season if you guys travel.
Yeah, I'll do this quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but that's actually a picture of my daughter several years ago. She has a lot of anxiety around flying in the plane. And so the two of us did a little problem solving around what's calming to her. And so we actually sat down and came up with these 1, 2, 3, 4 different sensory supports while she's on the plane. And because she was flat out saying, I am not going on the plane for Thanksgiving. I am not going. And we're like, this isn't really an option. So we were able to get her successfully on the plane. She wanted a weighted shoulder pad, she wanted it through her shoulders, not on her lap. She loves the smell of lavender. She associates that with home. So we put a couple little drops on her shoulder pad, noise canceling headphones, and then a little coloring book for her that can distract her. So she likes puzzles and coloring books and things like that. So even as a 23-year-old now, she still actually brings all those things on the plane with her. And she actually has a conversation with the person sitting next to her, and she always asks, do you mind if I have a little lavender? And if they say no, she's fine with it. She had a great conversation on the plane recently with someone who was like, oh, I totally get it. Yes, definitely put a little lavender on your pillow. If you want me to hold your hand, I'll hold your hand. It was really positive and sweet. So just a few things to keep in mind for that holiday travel. Okay. And then some of those sensory profiles, we'll talk a little more about those profiles. I think, Rachel, you were going to share, but again, these are our experiences during the holidays. I don't know that we have to go through all of them. We really covered a lot of them with the other holidays. But there's just, there's a lot going on out there during the holidays, music and lights and decorations and so many fun and exciting things. And that someone touched on earlier, it can be so fun and exciting and then turn to overwhelm pretty fast. So thinking about ways that we can support our nervous systems and our kids' nervous systems, because we always go in with the best of intentions, right? I kind of took over your slide there, Rachel.
No, it's great. I mean, I think that's a big one. I mean, now Thanksgiving is a whole week off for a lot of districts, so applicable there. But here, the 2-week holiday break also is a big disruption in routine and schedules, unique to December. And then gift wrapping was one we talked about too. That can be one that has like a range of sensory responses. Some really seekers love that feeling. Sometimes that's really uncomfortable, and just the anticipation is really hard for some children at Christmas, of waiting for gifts, waiting to open. It can be really hard.
Yeah. So going back to those sensory profiles, I wanted to talk about just a few specific strategies under each profile to get you thinking. It's a few strategies, but hopefully, it'll get you thinking about, oh, wait, maybe this would help my kid, and about other strategies that might work for you all. So we have a little grid here. Does it all fit in here? Well, hello, sort of. Since we started with the right hand upper quadrant, just a few ideas for those seekers who have a high threshold or tolerance. It's a great idea to add some of that heavy work in before you go out and before you do activities. Like, get the kid, actually, even with a seeker, get them breathing a little hard, like get them working, get them grounded and working a little hard. So they're kind of meeting that threshold sooner, so they're not seeking so much to try to meet that threshold when you're out and about. So those weight bearing activities we talked about with the jumping jacks, yogas, hanging from a pull-up bar, just hanging gives a lot of good, and it's really good for your hand strength too, to have a little pull-up bar and like practice lowering yourself down slowly. So that's there's, oh my goodness, a plethora of things that you can do that are weight bearing. Give your kid the job of carrying the backpack with the snacks, pushing the carts, doing the heavy work while you're out and about. So it's keeping them focused, meaningful and purposeful activity. So having them have a job and a purpose and engaging within the whole experience. And then have a little rhythm. Rhythm is very regulating. And some of our seekers, their rhythm's kind of off, their internal body rhythm. So whether it's giving them a nice bear hug and rocking back and forth with them, playing some calming music in the car that's about the resting heart rate for a kid, that's about 70 to 90 beats per minute. Finding some of that music that's calming and regulating is really helpful. And then if we go down to our avoiders down in the bottom right hand quadrant, they really need a lot of predictability and control. So all of those strategies that Rachel had talked about earlier will really help our avoiders. Have the kid help you plan the activities and the schedule. Give them some control with that. Deep pressure input, again, is very calming and regulating. Having gum available. Chewing gum is good. It's heavy joint work. It releases a little bit of calming serotonin. And if your kid likes gum and they're not going to be chewing or choking on it, like if your kid is too young, don't give them gum. But if you know your child would do well with gum, that could be a good tool. Those weighted lap pads in the car, blankets, compression clothing. Under Armour is a great brand for wearing something a little tight underneath your clothing because it kind of shifts and adjusts with your body. So you're getting a little extra compression whenever you move, and it's very grounding to wear for some of those kids, especially those kids who are sensitive to tactile input. Leaning against a wall. It sounds a little funny, but you're leaning your body against the wall. You're blocking out half of your visual input and you're just taking a break. So find a wall and lean against it with your kid to take a little break. Have an extra exit strategy beforehand, always with all our kids, and or a calming space where you can go. And then there's sensory stories, and I have a hyperlink in there that you can click on that has some examples of stories about other kids that have their sensory challenges. And then we have the sensitive ones, nourish the nervous system, really set that nervous system up for success with calming input, calming strategies before that activity. You could try some mindfulness techniques, paying attention to the present moment, taking calming breaths with your child. Providing those noise canceling headphones, weighted blankets. Again, neutral warmth is very calming. So a nice warm blanket or a hug, drinking something warm, and just warming up the inside. That calming music. Bringing their own stuffies or comfort items along so they have something. My daughter for some reason, she found bracelets really grounding and comforting for her, and so she would just wear bracelets and she would fidget with them and roll them around, and it's just kind of like, I am here. So that's what she chose. And then chewing gum again. And then our registration kids, they are the ones who are kind of slow to notice. So increase the sensory input. Have your child drink cold water through a straw while they're participating in activities. Chew mint gum, stimulating things. Keep your child moving to increase their engagement. Try activities that are really interactive, so they have to engage. And then combine activities with some scents or music to kind of lock in some of those fun core memories for your kid. And then on the next slide, I just have links to each profile of each of the kids. So you can, at your own leisure, click on those links to get a little more description of kids and ideas for them.
So thinking, so we only have a few minutes left, that we might just scan through these and then get to a few minutes for questions. A lot of these I kind of already mentioned, but I think the one piece I would say is also, especially I would say during December, think about like what routines you can really hold on to and maintain through that time, both for yourself, if you have like self-care routines or bedtime, exercise, food, whatever you might do for your own well-being, and then for your kids too, when you can, try to protect some routines to help maintain, especially, when you switch from when school age kids might switch from being in school to being home. Routines are really helpful for regulation. And then the other piece was just thinking about if there are gift wrapping challenges, like there are ways I use where you might wrap the gift, but put a picture on the outside of what it is. So the child still gets to engage with unwrapping, but that anticipation might not be so overwhelming for them. Consider opening gifts, one night for a certain number of nights so that it's spread out a little bit more. And just thinking about during that sort of opening of gift routine too, what those sensory needs might be. And I'm not going to go into this, but when I was talking about problem solving or having collaborative conversations with your child, if you had the thought, oh, I couldn't do that, or he can't, she can't, we're not there yet, this might be a great resource for you. So I think they changed their name, but it's like the Riverview Center for Growth is providing statewide virtual free collaborative problem solving. Sometimes it's called collaborative proactive solutions. And they have, I think, a winter, like 2 open winter groups. It runs weekly for 6 to 8 weeks. And so I linked that down here too. And again, it's a really great resource for giving you the sort of the language to empathize and align with what is hard for your child, and to try to sort of rewire our tendency to want to assume we know what's going on. And I think that that's a big piece when we think about sensory needs. Sometimes there are sensory needs that are not apparent to us, and we might assume there's a different reason for the avoidant behavior or for the difficult, so the presentation that is sort of causing a conflict in the family. Okay. And then emergency calming strategies in the moment.
So we go in with the best intentions, we're all prepped, we've done all this great work, and yet things happen, right? And there might be times where we weren't fully prepared, or just unexpected nervous system storms happen. And what do we do when our kid is feeling out of control and struggling? When they're in that state, they're in a brainstem state. I like to look at regulation through brain states. And when they're feeling that just out of control, whatever it is, anger or anxiety or whatnot, you want to do something brainstem related. The brainstem regulates our heart rate, breathing, and temperature. So you want to do something that has to do with heart rate, breathing, or temperature. So drinking ice water through a straw might sound kind of odd if they're out of control. But so many kids, when I offer that to them, when they're in that state, they accept it, because when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, your mouth goes dry and you are thirsty. And so if you can get your mouth wet, it kind of tells the nervous system, oh, I'm starting to calm down. It's also temperature. And you have to regulate your breathing in order to take a sip. So it really takes care of many of those areas of the heart rate, temperature, and breathing. Swinging and rocking rhythm, that might need to be something when they're starting to come down a little bit, and then just offering some of that rocking. It's going back to that neonatal development of being in the womb. Vibration is very calming, can be very calming. Music is a vibration too. So I would say, establish what is the most regulating music for your child beforehand, and then maybe you can slip it into the background a little bit. I've heard parents say Misty Mountains from The Hobbit is a really regulating song. And same with Somewhere Over the Rainbow by IZ from Hawaii is a very regulating song. Those fall within those 60-90 beats per minute. Wrapping that neutral warmth, wrapping in a blanket, a weighted blanket, heated rice pillow, and then taking deep breaths. But I want to say, if you tell someone when they're really out of control, take a breath, it's kind of like telling them to calm down. So and we all love being told to just calm down, don't we? So you want to do something that's more responsive, something more automatic. Try to find ways to get your kids to take some breaths. And then no talking. No talking. The songs are that Somewhere Over the Rainbow song by Israel. Can't pronounce his last name. He's also called IZ. It's the Hawaiian version. And then Misty Mountains from The Hobbit. But there are so many. You can just Google song 60 to 90 beats per minute too. All right. Oh, we're down to Q&A time. Look at that. And we're at 7 o'clock, but I don't know, Rachel, you good with answering a couple of questions if they're out there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody have any questions or ahas or things like, oh, I want to share this?
While people are typing into the chat, I just want to say thank you so much. There was so much helpful information in that. Two things I took away was giving yourself permission to say no. I constantly have to remind myself to do that. And then also I'm going to go search for those 60 to 90 minute beats per minute songs. That sounds fascinating. There is a question from Sarah Ruder, or comment. She says, my son is nonverbal. Would you mention anything different than what you talked about?
Is that in regards to the last slide, Sarah? Just to get a little clarification. I think if it was in regard to the last slide, most of those strategies, oh, just anything different. Well,
I mean, I think about the use of visuals, and maybe too, if you are going to someone's house, if they could send you pictures, you know, of their house, or if you have pictures from maybe a previous holiday, like a previous Thanksgiving, right? Things you could review or show them visually to kind of talk about and, you know, build that sort of predictability piece. You know, the use of visuals or pictures can be really helpful to sorry, Katie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no, that's fine. I think just from a sensory standpoint too, just being really curious and a detective around what your kid is seeking and what they're avoiding will give you some good indication of what might be calming for them and organizing for them as you're going out and about. So maybe even over the next week or so, take note of when they're really doing well, like things are going well and what's happening in the environment. And with lighting, with sound, with, you know, and just maybe even carving out a moment in time and just taking note of what seems to be working for your son.
Hi, this is Pam. I joined because my 2-year-old grandson lives with me who might have autism, but my 27-year-old son has Asperger's, and I really wish I'd had some of these ideas and tools back when he was younger. It would have made life so much easier.
Thank you for sharing, Pam. We will be sending out the slides and some upcoming CODSN events in a follow-up email after this. We'll also be sending out a link to a survey, and if you fill out the survey for this training, you'll be entered to win a chance at winning a $25 Visa gift card. And Rachel and Katie, if anyone thinks of any more questions, would it be okay if they followed up in an email and maybe reached out to CODSN afterward?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think I put my email in the about us slide, but yeah, absolutely, either through Stephanie or emailing me directly, open to any types of supports that we could provide additionally.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I hope everyone has the holiday season that fits what you want it to be.